Okay. Okay, thanks. So first I must start with a little bit of apology because it didn't somehow turn to my mind that when I go to MEP University, I will speak in English. So I prepare my slides in Czech. And also I focus on Czech perspective that, as we know, is very original. We are original. And in this topic, we are a little bit more skeptical. So for those of you who are not in the Czech mainstream, maybe something will sound a little bit strange or obsolete. And I will also talk about the energy situation in Czech, because it has something to do. Again, if you would be, I don't know, for example, from Germany, this is completely different universe, and I will show you why. And also, your colleagues were great in making very quick translation into English. So there could be something that will sound a little bit fancy, but I'm grateful for that, because otherwise you would have only Czech slides. So let me start. I want to take it in the broader context. I'm very happy then on Q&A to reply the questions, because my family has bought first electric car probably 5 years ago, and since 2 years ago we are using only electric cars. And as I'm by background mathematician, I love to look at the figures, so I'm very happy to talk about any details, but this is not what is in the presentation. So let me start with explaining why the electric mobility is important for the future. And here we must make a few small distinctions. I'm here talking about BEV, battery electric vehicles, because there are other vehicles that are considered as electric vehicles. And I must say, and this will be on next slide, that I believe that the battery electric vehicles will in future dominate in the small individual transportation. And here are the reasons why, and I would be very happy to be challenged later on. But the first, what is very important, is energy efficiency. And this is one of the winning factors, because they are much more efficient than ICEV, that is internal combustion engine vehicles. So that means that classical ones, plug-in hybrids or hydrogen electric vehicles. Here one should explain, for those of you who are not big fan of automotive, hydrogen car is electric car that has, instead of battery, it has battery actually, as a matter of fact, but to make it simple, instead of battery there is a tank with gas, with hydrogen, and there is a power generator, power cell, or how it's called, that makes from hydrogen electricity, but the rest of the powertrain is the same. There is also the battery, because the power cell normally doesn't have the output that would be sufficient for quick acceleration. So you have the buffer. The trick is that if we start with the combustion engine, people believe that if they have combustion engine, that they have a vehicle for mobility. But if you are physics, you know that you are not operating vehicle, you are operating the heating station that moves. Because the internal combustion engine is using more of the energy for generating heat than for transportation. And one would expect that if you want to transport, you want to use energy for transport and not for generating of the heat. Plug-in hybrid can do quite better, because it also accumulates the energy in the braking. So that means increasing the efficiency. But obviously it has limits, and it has also quite a substantial price tag, because it's very complicated technology. And the hybrid has the problem from the energy point of view that if you think about clean energy, you must take the clean energy, and with substantial energy loss produce hydrogen. Then you must, in order to be able to squeeze enough of hydrogen into the car, you must pressurize it very heavily. You use another energy. And then actually it's a little bit better, because in the cell, the loss is not so huge. And then it's okay. But nothing can compete with energy efficiency of the battery electric vehicle. And I will show you then the figures. The second reason, local emissions and pollutants. Here, obviously, the battery vehicles and hydrogen vehicles do quite well. Also, plug-in hybrids can do well if they use electricity, especially in the residential area. here I say potentially low greenhouse gas emissions. That is, I guess, quite important, but it works only if you produce electricity clean way. Obviously, if 100% electricity will be produced by the coal power plant, you don't have this result, and obviously also high energy efficiency will suffer. For greenhouse, what works are battery and hydrogen. In other case, you must think about the total cycle. So, for example, if you will generate the e-fuel by taking CO2 from the air, you can, at the end of the day, end up with the neutral balance. A great advantage, obviously, of battery cars works whenever you produce or you use clean and locally developed energy, because then you have also economic gains. And last not least, maybe for some people surprisingly, putting together electric car is much cheaper and much simpler compared to traditional combustion engine vehicles. So this is the theory, but the question is why to do it so quickly, why to use the regulation to promote something that after all should win, because it has substantial efficiency gain. And why, especially in such a small country like Czech Republic, we should push for electric vehicles. Here are some figures that can be surprising for some of you. If we look on CO2 emission per capita, we have one of the highest emissions in Europe, obviously, and among the higher in the world. This is US, that obviously from the point of view emission is not efficient. Here is Czech Republic. Below us there is Poland, there is China, here is average of EU, UK, here is Africa, and here's Asia. So obviously we are a small country, but what doesn't matter is to look at the country. What matters is to look at the figure per capita, and we are one of the countries that is polluting a lot with greenhouse emissions. And it's even worse if you look at the history. If you look at cumulative greenhouse emission, obviously the countries that start with the Industrial Revolution relatively quickly, like Czech Republic, have quite a big track. I just took the data from 50s, so this is where we started. Started of average, we have got to outrageously high figures, almost as high as in the US, and since that we are declining. Interesting that at that point UK was the lead, and they have got a little bit lower. If we look at the energy demand of GDP, unfortunately the same result. This is the Czech Republic, how much energy we need for a unit of creation of GDP. And you can see that it's not declining well, but still being quite substantially above. One can make an argument that we are exporting a lot, so that means that part of our emissions are done for export. But then it's good to look, for example, at China. And China on per capita basis is still below us. So I guess we have quite a good reason to look both in the Czech Republic for decreasing the greenhouse emissions and also increasing energy efficiency. In previous slide, I was trying to explain still without the figures that electric vehicles can do pretty well in both aspects. How difficult is it? One would expect it's difficult. That's why we have so much of debate about Green Deal, about Fit for 55. Some people, like politicians, would say that this is something that will destroy the living standard. If you look at the models that were created by Czech group Sepia, it's vice versa. They expect that this should rather actually speed up the economic growth. But I don't want to go into this incredibly complicated modeling. I will show you just my figures. Because as I said, we are at home a little bit kind of enthusiast on saving the energy. We live outside of Prague in small house, and we travel a lot. As you would expect, family with 2 kids. We have two cars, but at the same time we were trying to save the energy. So we were gradually introducing different measures how to do it, because I'm not terribly rich. We do it gradually and suboptimally, I would say. We are mixing basically three things: improving the energy efficiency of our house. The second, we try to generate a little bit of energy on our own. We started with heating the hot water, and plus now we are producing a little bit of electricity. Not actually a little bit, it's 6 megawatt a year. And we switched first car that was used for commuting to electricity, and secondly, we replaced the other car that I'm using for traveling to Strasbourg also, and both are electric. And you can see that, and this was for me quite surprising, we reduced the demand for energy from more than 40 megawatt hours for house and transportation to 15. That is maybe surprising for you. So overall reduction was 64%. As I like to play with the figures, I would say that most of these measures would have quite a decent economic return, probably somewhere in like around 10 years horizon. Only one that failed to be very effective was replacement of windows and doors, because we bought a little bit expensive, and this is expensive. This is expensive business. But all other measures surprisingly were good, and I will show you also a little bit on cars. So it's not right, not true to say that it's difficult to save the energy and difficult to reduce the emissions. I don't want to say that someone who is producing iron or something can do the same, but at the same time you can do a lot of things. And you know, if you look at the figures, it's quite obvious that switch from the combustion engine to battery vehicle played a very big role in saving the energy. Nevertheless, I guess we should not overstress importance of e-mobility. We should have in mind that the best way how to save the planet and save the energy is sometimes not to travel. You know, maybe it's not so difficult sometimes, not only for people, also for goods. The second, if you need to travel, no electric vehicle perform by far close to the efficiency of public transportation, especially when it's electricity and when it's train. There is a guy from Czech Siemens, Mr. Paul, who has a wonderful presentation that would explain you all the physics, but it's quite intuitive, because in train you have a lot of people, you run with the electricity, so that means you have high efficiency, and plus the physics is fantastic because the resistance is low. So, you know, that's, if you need to travel, fantastic would be travel by electric train. If you need to travel individually, then obviously battery electric cars perform much better than the combustion engine. But again, one should be careful in overdoing this argument. First of all, to scrapping functional cars would hardly make things better. And also we should have in mind that electric cars are pretty expensive, so a lot of people can't afford them for the time being. But anyway, the other argument that is used against the electromobility is that we want to introduce something that is new, something that have never been here, and that's the reason why we should not trust it. If you look a little bit in the history of cars, you would find surprisingly that the first combustion engine was created probably somewhere at the end of 19th century, tens of years after the first electric vehicle was in theory, I would say rather in theory, created, and long time after the first real electric vehicle works, because in mid of the 19th century some functional batteries were created. If you look who was the first one, or what car the first time broke 100 kilometers per hour barrier, you would find it was electric vehicle. So it was in 99, so probably at that time I would expect that combustion engines were not very quick enough. If you again dig in the history, you would find that at the turn of the century more cars were powered by the electricity than by the petrol, you know. But then things have changed because there was very speed development of the combustion engine, and because the battery were not up to standards to deliver what people start to expect, that means the long distance. Before that, there was even effort actually to use electric cars as the taxi, I guess in the US, and also there used to be kind of car sharing. One can imagine that it was not terribly successful with that level of the technology. But if you at least articles that I have said say that it was probably somewhere in the 20s when the electricity car have lost completely the battle with the combustion engine, from reasons that one can imagine. Where we are now, because that means that basically we are going back. We are going back to something that exists and that have lost the technological battle. Now it seems it's somehow gaining. So I can see basically two factors. One is the regulation and the policy of the states, and the second is technological development. If you are talking about the regulations, one can look at California. That I guess it's quite a time. It would be like maybe 30, 40 years. I don't know exactly, when they create the regulation that even force companies to sell the zero emission vehicles in order to be allowed to sell the other vehicles. These were so-called compliant cars that were created in California. In China, there was kind of political decision to promote e-mobility. Probably at the beginning, the reason was catastrophic quality of the air in the cities. If those of you like me have been maybe 15, 20 years ago in China, you know what I am talking about. So this was for them good way how to improve the air quality, and also maybe one of the efforts to get edge over the others. Quite a successful one. And then we have European Union. If you go back into the history, you would find that the regulation of fleet emissions is how much, like 15 years old. But the main review took place in 2020, and this introduced the penalties for too high fleet emissions by manufacturers. And because the target level was declining, it was clear that in order to avoid the penalty for too much of greenhouse emissions, you need to produce the cars with very low emissions. At the beginning, hybrids will do the trick, but with the decline in target variable, it was clear that you need to get in portfolio zero emission vehicles or something with very, very small emission, like plug-in hybrid. This regulation was amended recently because I guess 2020 regulation goes up to 2030. Then there was question how to extend it, and as the plan, so-called Fit for 55, that is setting the goal for emission reduction. The agreement was to phase out the non-zero emission cars in the EU in 2035. That we can talk about it later. I guess this was a good decision. Then look at the other side, at the supply side. So I put it a little bit simple, but if we go back to somewhere like 2010 to 2015, there were already actually 3 cars at the market that were quite successful, despite of the fact that technology was really not very highly developed. Even in Czech Street, you can find few Nissan Leaf. That was probably the biggest really mass production electricity car with quite a high price tag. This was my first experience with EV car. I just leased for one day and a few days, and this car that in winter can run around 100 kilometers. So it was not incredibly good, but still a lot of these cars on the street. But overall, they sold about 500,000 of the unit, so it was not unsuccessful. Different story is Tesla Model S that is still actually being produced. This was something completely different. It was a high market car with very few compromises. Very long range at the beginning, free of charging, and incredible power and speed. And somewhere between them, there was a small BMW i3 that stopped. The production was stopped in 22. This is city cars. You can see a lot of them on the street. It was the first car that my family had. And this also scored 250,000 plus units, so quite a big number. But obviously now we are in completely different situation, especially in Europe. The car producers, actually all of them are assuming phasing out the combustion engine since, let's say, 2030 or maybe a little bit later. But they shut down basically development, and everything is focused on electric mobility. And you have now tens and tens of models at the market. Where we stand, okay. So before talking about how the market looks like, let's again now go back to the economy. So what is the energy saving? So if I look at the users data on German web split monitor, if you compare the cars of very similar size, you would say that energy consumed by battery car is roughly 70% lower than by the electric car. How you make the calculation? It's relatively simple. 1 liter of gas or diesel basically consists something around 10 kilowatt hours of the energy. How this saving works? So if you would drive average 15,000 kilometers per hour per year, you would basically save the same amount of the electricity that is produced by the small solar power plant at the roof of the small house. What is interesting is that if you in Czech build this photovoltaic power station, you get subsidy of 200,000 in order to produce the electricity. If you buy the electric car, that does exactly the same for overall energy balance, because it saved the same amount of electricity until recently. You don't get anything. Some people are elaborating what would mean very fast deployment of the electric cars to basically the local transportation and energy sector. So if you made a calculation and you would assume that basically over next 10 years, the proportion of the electric cars currently in Czech Republic from, I guess, 2 percentage points on total sales will go up 10 every year, you will end up after these 10 years only in 20% of cars on the streets being electric. The trick is that cars on average are staying very, very long on the road. So that means that even if something really revolutionary will take place, so that means that from this year to next year you will get to 10% and 20, 30, blah, blah, blah. Still, the share of the electric cars at total stock will go relatively slowly. What it would mean for the electricity demand, if you do the calculation based off these figures, you would find that all these cars will consume something about 3 terawatt hours of the electricity. That is roughly 5% of today's electricity consumption. So that means a lot of people would say, if we move to e-mobility, we suddenly need 20 new nuclear power plants or this or that. That's not exactly right. Figures would tell you something different. But if this takes place, we will save quite a lot of gasoline. It looks like 5 billion of liters. If you make it into money, you would find that the owners of these cars would save something more than 100 billion of crowns. But obviously not free of charge, because they would have to buy electric cars that can, but not necessarily must be more expensive. And we will get into that later. I promised some kind of personal figures. I am contributing to Sprit Monitor, so these are our data. This was my lovely Honda Civic that we sold in order to save the planet, because I'm using car a lot. So I decided that I want to go for something a little bit cleaner. As you can see, I was not using the potential of this quick car. So I was driving, especially after war started, I put sticker on my car, don't exceed more than 115 to not give money to Putin. So I was driving a little bit slower. But on average, my consumption was about 6 liters. 6 liters means 60 kilowatt hours per hour. While the electric car that was at the time, that is actually at the time used by my has consumption 16. So that means it needs 1.6 liter of gas or petrol equivalent. If you take it to the money, and I always try to do some calculation based on kind of realistic prices, you would find that cost of 100 kilometers is below 10 euro, and here it's below 4 euro. So not surprisingly, I once write an article to Portal Hybrid comparing total cost of ownership of our first electric cars. This was BMW i3 used car. With this one, it was much cheaper to run overall cost. So that means cost of petrol, cost of maintenance, purchase versus sale price. So these figures on previous slides, they work. This is what you see in reality. How is the situation? How likely is it that people would buy electric cars, and how expensive is it? So as I said, I'm enthusiast and following the market. It's changing basically every month, I would say. So now if you look at the premium cars, let's say price tag 60,000 euro or more, you would find that basically price of electric cars and petrol is basically the same. Disadvantage of electric cars is that you cannot run 4,000 kilometers without charging. You would most likely run even on highway 500 kilometers, and then you need to charge, and it takes you a few tenths of minutes. For me, it sometimes happens that drinking coffee takes longer than actually charging the car, but not always, obviously. But so flip side is the range and the need to charge in long distance. Otherwise, they are clear positive. So especially operational costs are low and performance is much stronger, because it's much cheaper to make very powerful electric cars than to make very powerful combustion engine cars. I guess here in this sector, its price is indifferent, but especially in some countries, there is mistrust and not understanding the technology. So that's why people, instead of buying Tesla 3, are still buying Skoda Octavia. That is basically, if well equipped, roughly at the same price. If we go a little bit lower to sector, maybe I would say not 40,000 euro, maybe 50,000 euro. You would see that there is clear dominance of Tesla or Model 3 or above that Model Y, while the other have a problem because at the same price tag they produce car that is all smaller, or at the same size car is more expensive. That's funny that European car producers are now heavily beaten by Tesla that produce near Berlin. Not in Romania or Bulgaria, but the main factory for Tesla Y, that is the most successful model of Tesla now, is in Berlin. So that means paying the German prices. Then there is sector that is used mostly by the family. So this is kind of Volkswagen Golf or Skoda Octavia plus minus. This is the sector where I believe is the biggest price gap, because I would say on average you really overpay. I would say 100, 200,000. So that means 4,000 to 8,000 euros for electric car. If you are looking at cheaper combustion engine model and electric, probably if you would take roughly the same equipment and the speed and acceleration, this would be a little bit less. But you cannot say to a guy who is going for shopping, I don't know, Skoda, Kamiq or something, go to electric car. No, the price difference is substantial. But probably you would get money back after around 100,000 kilometers, because you have seen that savings is quite substantial. What is interesting is what's going on in the small market cars. So I'm talking about like Czech Škoda Fabia or Peugeot 208. Here, French producers mainly are now coming to the market with the car that is supposed to be at 20,000. That is still expensive, but this is basically the price of well-equipped combustion engine of the same battery, of the same category. But obviously, having in mind that people don't have, a lot of people don't have 20,000 euros to buy the car. In France, they are thinking about leasing these cars. They want to use the government subsidy, I guess, of 100 euro to get the price really affordable. But obviously here, this would be a good place to discuss how big will be incentive to own the car into the future. That is even, I would say, more tricky concept for car manufacturers. So how to get more electric cars to the market, because it can save both greenhouse emission and save the energy, and why it doesn't work. So first, I am convinced that technology-wise, this is a very good offer, and I guess in all categories mentioned, TCO, so-called total cost of ownerships, are lower for battery cars than combustion engine, but in some categories, purchase price is higher. And this is where we are somewhere here. As the secondary market is not so developed, it's difficult to buy cheaply electric car. I guess the biggest issue when people are considering to buying electric cars is to understand how it works. So really to say why you need a car, what purpose you will use for it. When I talked to my brother, and he was always arguing with me, he said, I will buy electric cars only when it gets me without charge to Croatia. So I asked him, when have you been last time in Croatia? He said, 7 years ago. So do you want to buy the car according to what you need once every 7 years, or maybe every 10 years? It's not probably the way how to go forward. So the first is to understand why you are buying a car, and the second, understand how electric cars works. I guess those people that understand, they will save a lot, because they will not overpay for something that they really don't need. But it's very difficult to explain without a real experience. In practice, the limitation of cars, especially with a little bit smaller battery, is smaller than one would normally expect. What is slowing down the mobility? Obviously, as I said, lack of, I don't want to say the knowledge, but experience, because it's very difficult to explain. One should go through that in practice, and then you see the reality. In countries like Czech, it's very much questioned by many influential people that it's a good way, that it works. So people have obviously the doubts. There is certain distrust, once this is a fire, once it's something else. If you look, for example, in US recently, the biggest obstacle is considered to be lack of charging opportunities. And one can really say that if you compare the charging infrastructure in US and Europe, I understand how Americans have got to that, because it's a part of highly populated areas. It's very difficult. Limited availability of used cars as the cheap purchase option is not here, because it will take some time. And economically speaking, some governments are not willing anyhow to support this, despite of the fact that at least compensation for externalities would be quite economically legitimate. So the economy makes sense. But there is a question how to get the energy. Because all this positive impact, efficiency and greenhouse emissions are based on the assumption that you will get more and more clean energy into your car. Not necessarily today. Electric cars that you would potentially buy will be here for 15 years. So that means you should look at the average. But there is still question how feasible is it? And obviously one is talking about renewables. So as the matter of fact, I made some very simple calculation. How difficult, for example, is it to produce a lot of electricity through photovoltaics? Because some people would argue, okay, we know that we can make electricity, but to make a lot of electricity would mean that all country will be covered with the panels, and we will have a little bit troubles to move within them. So if you make a simple calculation, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you would find that produce half of electricity consumed in the Czech Republic would, in theoretical calculation, request 0.2% of the land being used for the photovoltaics. So it's not right that it's not feasible. But one can obviously argue that it doesn't help us to have a lot of electricity when the sun is shining. I have no electricity if this is day like today or the evening. And this is the second part what I want to talk about, but probably I will skip most of these things and show you only some charts. So we in Czech, we know that it doesn't make sense to use renewables because they can't work. We used to be convinced about it. Some others are not convinced. So if you look how big proportion of electricity was for renewables, that obviously is not just wind and solar. It's quite often is it water and so on. You would find that in 2020, in some countries it was how much? I guess this is 80%. Here is 70, 80, 90. No, actually this is 112. They do more than they consume. But if you look at Austria, it's 17. If you look at Portugal, it's close to 16. Here you have European Union being below 40, and here you have Czech Republic being at the 14. Obviously, some countries have the better conditions, some have worse, but some also make a politic choice that was not terribly smart. Karel Schwarzenberg always told me that he's very kind of that it's funny, the Czech story about no wind in the Czech Republic, that we have no wind, so we can build wind turbines. So he said, always when I'm driving from Vienna to Czech until the Austrian borders, there is enough wind because everywhere there are windmills. Then you stop across the borders and probably wind stops at the borders because there are no winds. That's a nonsense. There are many studies that will tell you that real potential for wind electricity in Czech Republic is around 30%. So this is first thing. Here, okay, the same story as with the cars. Neither photovoltaics, neither wind energy is new. It exists. It was created hundreds, sometimes 100 years ago, and it's commercially used for a long time. What's the main change and the main driver is increased demand combined with the scientific progress. And you can see that the cost of photovoltaic panel went down from above $300 in 2009 to $30 to $40 now. And this is a real driver. It's not only scientific progress, this is substantially increased demand. And this is what makes a trick. So now, basically, if you look the mainstream development of the energy sector, especially in Europe, people know that the cheapest electricity can be produced by solar and wind. We can save a lot of energy, as I was arguing. Countries are trying to put together policies that will lead to cheap and sustainable energy. And what is quite important is to really understand that electricity is good and can be traded. You can hardly imagine the good that is easier to trade than the electricity. To get electricity from Czech to Germany is like this. To get apples from Czech to Germany, it takes hours and cost a lot of money. So we should aim for making sure we have a sustainable, clean, reliable and cheap electricity. How to get to that? To those of you who are a little bit interested about energy, this is what I use as the benchmark. This is US consultancy, Lazard, that are every year making estimates of yearly average. How expensive is it globally on average to produce 1 megawatt of the electricity by different means of the production? What one is concerned about, how to produce electricity cheap way. So if you look, the cheapest are big solar and big wind. Electricity is just above $20. So that means you are somewhere around half koruna per kilowatt hour. Obviously, if you, instead of big solar installation, go for small ones like rooftops, then obviously it's terribly expensive. If you put the storage into the windmill, also it gets expensive. Comparing with gas is a little bit tricky because the cost of gas is not globally uniform. It's much cheaper in the US than in Europe. So this is something that I guess it's not practical for Czech comparison. What is interesting is this one. It's combined cycle that combines creation of heat and electricity. That is quite effective. But our Czech favorite is nuclear. So you can see what are estimates, how expensive will be electricity from new nuclear. So you are basically talking about the price that is 6+ times more expensive. But obviously, you cannot say that I go for this one and this one because you will run out of electricity if sun will not be shining and the wind will not be blowing. So that's why you need to make a mix. How to do it? This is example of, I guess, German data from September when sun is not shining so much. So you can see that mixture of production is changing from 1 hour to the other. And you need a highly flexible system that makes sure that you produce electricity cheap and there is always enough of electricity. This is the mix probably where people are heading. So if you look, this is Dutch. So Dutch have advantage of the wind on the shore, but otherwise it's roughly the same conditions for the solar. So you can see the biggest installed capacity is gas that is used as the flexible supply when renewables don't run, but then they have huge capacity in solar, huge capacity in wind, a little bit of coal, a little bit of biomass, and a little bit of nuclear. If you look at Czech mix, and this is production in September, you see the biggest supply is coal, followed by nuclear and almost nothing in the renewables. The result is different. The greenhouse emission path. You see that hopelessly worse is Poland, that is very quickly building renewables, but the rest is the coal. Here you have Czech Republic, roughly similar to Balkan. Germany still quite a lot of coal that is phasing out. Very good France because they have quite a lot of old cheap nuclear power energy, and these are the guys that basically were able to build new mix that is cheap. Obviously in Scandinavia with wind and with the water. Here I will be just quickly. We always saw that we are smart in energy sector. According to estimate, this is estimate made by one of the biggest Czech electricity generator. They believe that we are heading for substantially more expensive electricity if we don't invest properly into roughly the same mix as the others do. So if we stay where we are, we will have a big trouble because we will overpay for the electricity. According to the same analyst, they would say that if we don't do anything, the price difference could be around 30 euro per megawatt hour. So this is almost 1 koruna per kilowatt. That is not dreadful for the household, but it's very bad for businesses, obviously. But according to his assessment, we would fail in securing security of supply, low price, and sustainability. We can go further. Other interesting question is what will be going on further in energy market. You know, in Czech we have always the assumption that the energy consumption will go just up because we will get more richer. If you look at the data, these are data, I guess, the German data that shows that there is decoupling between the GDP and the energy consumption. So that means you can do a lot in saving the energy, but at the same time, what you should have in mind that we probably will see switch from the gas and coal and petrol to electricity. So probably electricity demand will go up, but if you save properly, you can do overall saving. What is the plan for the Czech Republic if we want to avoid that we will have really expensive electricity? Again, assumption of one of Czech electricity firms, they would say that we need to speed up renewables very, very quickly. Now we are below 2 gigawatts, so they believe that up to 2030 we should build around 15 gigawatts of solar and 3 gigawatts of wind. They believe that we need to replace part of our coal power plants that will not be competitive enough with gas power plants, estimated 5 giga. We need to improve the connectivity with Germany because Germans will be able to produce electricity cheaper. So in order to moderate the price, it would be good to have better links, estimate around 1 to 2 gigawatts, and we need to do the storages. Storages are still not legislated properly in Czech legislation. We failed to implement the EU law, so that's why we don't have storages, and that's why we overpay for the system services to coal producers. So that's all in a nutshell. Thank you. So first of all, most of the cars that are produced in Czech Republic are not sold in the Czech Republic. So what's obvious is that that we don't do our not that our decisions are not independent on the rest of the world. You know, so concerning the car industry, we have a target for phasing out of combustion engines. The car producers made investment decisions, that they basically stopped developing the combustion engines. They have now in their drawers, they have plans for next facelift, but nothing more. And they are now focusing all research to electric car. This is the reality, and we can't do anything about it. So more we would rely on combustion engine cars, it would be more obvious than in 2035 we will be out of the business. The real problem is that there is estimate that assembly complexity of the battery electric cars compared to combustion engine is just 1/3. So you can easily make estimates that a lot of people will get out of business, both on the final assembly, and because in theory you can do cars 3 times quicker, and obviously on supply, because if you produce some parts of the cars, they just will not be needed. You know, there will be still probably combustion engine cars on the roads in 2050, because last could be sold in 2035, and they can easily last 15 years, but just you can make estimates how big the market will be. So the problem is that now firms are transforming. Germans now, German BMW make a decision. They didn't say the date, but they say that they pushed all the combustion engines production in Europe outside of Germany, and all electricity producer into the Germany. So it can happen what these guys will do probably in 2030 and 2035. So first, the combustion engine is technology that is gone. We can argue. I try to make some estimate, just simple calculation linked to that Euro 7 discussion that was here incredibly popular. How many combustion engine cars can be produced in Europe up to 2035, since let's say 27 or 28, and depending on how speed will be phased in of battery cars, you can end up easily with 40,000 units only. 40 million units. 40 million units, it means 4 years of the production. So it's not relevant. What is the relevant for the economy is how big proportion of this industry will be able to transform to be in the business in 2040, and how much will be lost. And this is a big problem. But what would not save these guys are to talk about that combustion engines are great and battery electric cars are bad, because the decision was made now. So we are running big risk. So that's why I'm arguing that we really must focus on getting into our economy new investments that will have some much longer expected lifespan. It's called in Europe net zero industry. So this is, I don't know, energy, heating pumps, the things for the transmission, photovoltaics, and so on. And there will be probably a big wave of these investments because the global demand is increasing everywhere. And there will be need for new investments, and these guys will invest very quickly. And what's very important is that we get at least part of that into the Czech Republic, because it's clear that part of our economy will be gone. And if you don't replace those who are going down with someone who is going up, on average, you will not get to positive territory. So this is very, very big risk. And that political rhetoric that is questioning basically everything that is already decided, it doesn't help.
First of all, thank you for your conference. It was really interesting. And I wanted to ask, because one part of your conference was to ask about what's stopping electromobility, right? And you've mentioned some factors, but you didn't mention, for example, the price of the cars. I'm from Spain, which the most selling car is the Dacia Sandero, which runs 30,000 euros. And the average price of an electric car maybe is around 40,000 euros, right? So this means like a barrier for entry for plenty of people. So my question is, how are going to involve the low and middle classes of Europe in this transition?
Okay.
Also, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have some experiences in the past couple of weeks, month. The Chinese are building a huge battery factory in eastern Hungary. Also, they are considering building a battery factory in eastern Slovakia. I have just arrived back from Liberia, and in all these West African countries, Chinese cars are becoming more and more popular. And in many of those countries like Mali, like Niger and so on, Chinese are taking over the control over the deposits of natural materials as well. So my question is, what are the current efforts within the EU to avoid a new situation of a one-sided dependence on one country like we had in last 20 years with gas and Russia? Thank you.
Okay, so on prices, you see, in new cars, I guess the competition is driving the price closer. But the trick is that most of the people don't have money to buy new cars. And that's why the secondary cars are important. So that's why I guess it's quite wise if some countries will push the fleets, especially the fleets, big corporate purchasers of the cars, to buy electric cars. In Czech, around 70% of cars are not sold to private individuals, but to businesses. If you would force them to buy more electric cars, and especially fleets are very often bought on short-term leasings, you will get after 2-3 years the car that will have 30% lower price tag. After another maybe, and I'm typical buyer of such a cars normally, I will own it probably next 5 years. After 5 years, probably price would fall by 70%. So the secondary market is the key. I guess on primary market, on new cars market, there will be convergence quickly, but still for too many people, they can't afford to buy new cars. So then the secondary market. And if, and let's see how that reliability issue will be there, if people will get confidence that 2-3 years car is here like you knew, but even 8 years cars is okay for them, then I guess it will be, then we will be in the same situation as we are now. So this is my estimate. I'm quite convinced that around 2030, 2035 for used car buyers, they will have very similar choice between electric and combustion engine, and choice will be theirs, so I'm not so concerned about it. On this one, I would differentiate the cars and the batteries and raw materials. On cars, still, so far as we talk, obviously Chinese made a smart decision to promote it, and they have a technological advantage. Okay? I am not sure if a lot of their product is financially viable because they produce so much and sell a little bit that I am not sure that this will continue. But for the time being, Europe as such is huge net exporter of the car, not net importer. And the biggest disruptor for European companies on the electric market is by far Tesla. Followed with very huge distance by MG, but there's no one. I guess in top 10 EU marks, according to sale, there is only MG somewhere at the end of top 10. So far it's not a problem. This is but it can change. So that's why one should be concerned, especially if Chinese will address kind of overcapacity in their car industry and will try to solve it by promoting the exports, then we can be in trouble. But so far,
thank you for your conference. It was really interesting, and I wanted to ask because one part of your conference was to ask about what's stopping electromobility, right? And you've mentioned some factors, but you didn't mention, for example, the price of the cars. I'm from Spain, which the most selling car is the Dacia Sandero, which runs 30,000 euros, and the average price of an electric car maybe is around 40,000 euros, right? So this means like a barrier for entry for plenty of people. So my question is, how are going to involve the low and middle classes of Europe in this transition?
Okay.
Also, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have some experiences in the past couple of weeks, month. The Chinese are building a huge battery factory in eastern Hungary. Also, they are considering building a battery factory in eastern Slovakia. I have just arrived back from Liberia, and in all these West African countries, Chinese cars are becoming more and more popular. And in many of those countries like Mali, like Niger and so on, Chinese are taking over the control over the deposits of natural materials as well. So my question is, what are the current efforts within the EU to avoid a new situation of a one-sided dependence on one country like we had in last 20 years with gas and Russia? Thank you.
Okay, so on prices, you see, in new cars, I guess the competition is driving the price closer. But the trick is that most of the people don't have money to buy new cars. And that's why the secondary cars are important. So that's why I guess it's quite wise if some countries will push the fleets, especially the fleets, big corporate purchasers of the cars, to buy electric cars. In Czech, around 70% of cars are not sold to private individuals, but to businesses. If you would force them to buy more electric cars, and especially fleets are very often bought on short-term leasings, you will get after 2-3 years the car that will have 30% lower price tag. After another maybe, and I'm typical buyer of such a cars normally, I will own it probably next 5 years. After 5 years, probably price would fall by 70%. So the secondary market is the key. I guess on primary market, on new cars market, there will be convergence quickly, but still for too many people, they can't afford to buy new cars. So then the secondary market. And and let's see how that reliability issue will be there. If people will get confidence that 2-3 years car is here like you knew, but even 8 years cars is okay for them, then I guess it will be. Then we will be in the same situation as we are now. So this is my estimate. I'm quite convinced that around 2030, 2035 for used car buyers, they will have very similar choice between electric and combustion engine, and choice will be theirs, so I'm not so concerned about it. On this one, I would differentiate the cars and the batteries and raw materials. On cars, still, so far as we talk, obviously Chinese made a smart decision to promote it, and they have a technological advantage. Okay? I am not sure if a lot of their product is financially viable because they produce so much and sell a little bit that I am not sure that this will continue. But for the time being, Europe as such is huge net exporter of the car, not net importer. And the biggest disruptor for European companies on the electric market is by far Tesla. Followed with very huge distance by MG. But there's no one. I guess in top 10 EU marks, according to sale, there is only MG somewhere at the end of top 10. So far, it's not a problem. This is but it can change. So that's why one should be concerned, especially if Chinese will address kind of overcapacity in their car industry and will try to solve it by promoting the exports, then we can be in trouble. But so far, this is not the biggest concern. Now the concern is how to reduce the gap compared to Tesla. I guess this is the on batteries. Since many years ago, there is so-called Battery Alliance project that is promoting through private funding the batteries factories, and I guess the goal is around 2030. I don't know, like 80% of battery being produced in the EU, and we are on the track. This is moving, and this is basically commercial. Obviously, the governments can provide state aid according to state aid rules, but this is not that the Battery Alliance. I guess EIB is the main player of that, but I don't know the details. This is on the track. More difficult are raw materials because Chinese were smart to get the control. Here, I guess there are two potentially good news, and we have now it's in trialogue. It will be approved very quickly. It's critical raw materials that both set the targets for some mining when we can, but mostly for processing, because the problem is not only that we don't have raw materials, but we don't have a processing capability. So these are targets for EU in that legislation that will be approved within a very quick period of time. But obviously we should do more diplomacy in Africa, because I guess a lot of people are not impressed about impact of Chinese investments. So if we are smart, we can get a little bit more ground. But I guess what's the most promising? First of all, we must hope that China will stay in the global economy. A few years ago, we had a chance to create more pressure on them, because they were very much relying on their exports. But now it seems to me that situation has changed, and it's domestic demand who is biggest driver of their economy. See, we have lost this edge. So now possible trade war with China will be very costly for Western economy. So first, it would be good to keep them in the global economy. But what is for me most promising is that the market economy is basically creating pressure that at the moment when some component, some raw material is too expensive, they are trying to find a way how to use it less or how to replace. So, just last week there was information that on Swedish Northvolt, or how it's called company, they will produce the battery without lithium. It has worse energy density, but you don't need lithium. So this is clear protection against lithium being too expensive. And actually, lithium price is falling quite heavily, because as the demand increase, also supply increase. Tesla is excellent in reducing piece by piece the amount of expensive components, not because the owner would be so concerned about well-being of the world, but because they want to save the money. So according to, I had recently podcast with guy from Czech Technical University described how huge quantity of new developments are in the laboratories that are ready to be used, but a lot of them don't have a business case, But if something will get too expensive, the business case will come, and we are not ready for everything, by far not, but I guess we are not in such a bad situation as people would explain.